Enkrid stared at the tip of the sword that Asia held out. It was the same as before. Asia's body blurred, leaving only the blade visible, and then only the tip of the sword remained, blocking his vision. The sense of distance disappeared. Asia was no longer visible. Soon the tip of the sword began to tremble. Is this how it starts? Why?
Because I provoked her with my words.
It felt as if she was telling him to prove it. Steady breathing, a wall to overcome without killing, the ferryman's words, the trembling tip of the sword. The trembling dot began to split, appearing as multiple points. He imagined deflecting each one of them. Each version of himself deflecting the dots was different. He became Rem, then Ragna, then Jackson. As he faced off against the sword tip, he felt the distinct characteristics of those he imitated. Of course, it was part of the learning process. Rem's approach was to play along. Jackson was the type to clear the field before it was even set, fighting only on his terms. Ragna, on the other hand, would cover the opponent's will with his own. Enkrid followed each method in turn. He had repeated this over and over, more than 300 times today. They all seemed different, yet they were the same. Why could Rem and Ragna do what they did?
It's intuition.
It was possible because they had keen, precise senses. Whether that took the form of heightened physical senses like Jackson, or was something only triggered when holding a sword, like Ragna, the conclusion was the same. Enkrid had honed that precise intuition. In the end, it all came full circle.
This bastard, huh?
Asia spoke, her voice echoing in his ears. The dot vanished from Enkrid's eyes, and everything seemed to blur and disappear. It was only natural. Enkrid had closed his eyes. Darkness enveloped him. Soon he sensed everything through sound, touch, and his sixth sense as he swung his sword. Diagonally, at an angle, pivoting on his left foot, transferring the force of his rotating waist into the strike. The blade moved as if it were cutting through the air.
You think that'll work?
Asia shouted as she withdrew her sword and took a defensive stance. It was a simple diagonal slash, but it couldn't be blocked by merely targeting the sword's tip. Targeting the sword's tip meant nothing to those who didn't see it. In an instant, the speed of Enkrid's blade surged as if it were stretching forward. To deflect the strike, you had to catch the exact point of impact, but the change in speed made that difficult. Though Enkrid introduced such a change, Asia twisted her wrist at the last moment and flicked the sword away. If she couldn't block something like this, the title of Junior Knight and the name of the Red Cape Knights would have been undeserved. Enkrid pulled the deflected sword back with force and slashed downward. Wong! Asia retreated. As Enkrid opened his eyes, Asia once again pointed her sword toward him and assumed her stance.
Is it that you don't want to admit you've been beaten?
Still in his downward slash stance, Enkrid asked.
Try again,
Asia replied. There was no need to close his eyes this time. Enkrid intentionally let his focus blur. By leaving only a vague image, concentration would wane. Targeting the sword's tip was a technique that preyed on the opponent's concentration. In other words, this was enough. The lack of visual clarity could be compensated with other senses. From his downward slash stance, Enkrid twisted his wrist and struck upward. His sword shot up like a lightning bolt. Asia couldn't ignore it and had to block. She held her sword horizontally and absorbed the force by jumping backward to avoid Enkrid's immense strength. The blades met and parted. A loud bang echoed, and sparks flew between them. Even though she deflected it, the impact sent shockwaves through her body. Asia knew well that she couldn't win against him in a contest of strength. Enkrid's half-blurred eyes regained their focus.
Once more,
He asked again.
What are you?
Asia couldn't understand what was happening. The first time, she could dismiss it as luck, but twice? The truth was, she already knew after the first time. Enkrid had broken the targeting the sword's tip technique. But how was this possible? During their sparring, he struggled even to face her, let alone find a solution. His technique was far from perfect, and he had little experience fighting against techniques like hers. But this, it felt as if he had trained separately, targeting only his sword hundreds of times. The attacks felt as though they were perfectly aligned, which left a crack in Asia's composure.
my mind is wavering.
The moment she realized this, Asia regained control. She steadied her breathing. When the mind wavers, you lose momentum. That's why Asia dismissed it. No, she expanded her understanding to encompass the situation.
All right. So this is the ridiculous talent that Luagarne was talking about?
I got lucky.
A common excuse. It sounded like a provocation. One corner of Asia's mouth lifted.
You hear a lot that your words are annoying, don't you?
Sometimes.
Yeah, you're really annoying.
Thanks for the compliment.
Words wouldn't work against Enkrid. It wasn't common to find someone in the Knights who could be as sharp-tongued as him. Asia let her sword speak for her instead of her tongue. After all, targeting the sword's tip wasn't the only technique she had.
Even if a technique is broken, mastery doesn't come all at once.
That's a universal truth, but before 10 exchanges had passed, Asia's assumptions began to crack. Enkrid's technique showed a level of completion that hadn't been there before. His previously imprecise swordsmanship had become refined. For example, the gap between deflecting and immediately countering had shortened. In the past, he would over-twist his wrist, giving his opponent a chance to react. But now that wasn't the case. Everything was more measured, from the angle of his wrist to the amount of force he used to deflect and push away. There was a noticeable precision.
This is absurd.
It was the kind of talent that made you shake your head in disbelief. At this rate, he was showing more potential than even those considered seniors within the junior knights. Asia had to dodge as her thrust was deflected, watching as Enkrid's sword twisted like a snake. His reactions had become faster, and his sense of timing had improved. Breaking the targeting the sword's tip technique wasn't the only thing he had done.
How?
Had he been training relentlessly for months under a skilled teacher? Though surprised repeatedly, Asia once again steadied her mind.
What is will?
It is the heart, the belief, and the determination. How could someone who has lost their will win in reality? Using her master's teachings, Asia steadied herself once more. This applied even to Enkrid's current situation. He had steadied his mind by declaring that he didn't want to kill Asia. Asia managed to do the same in real time. Indeed, the mindset of a junior knight was something different.
Huh.
With a shout, she shook off her distractions. She rotated on her right foot, thrusting her sword with the strength of her pivot into her right hand. This was the third technique of will, following intimidation and the phantom sword, a high-speed thrust. It was similar to Enkrid's will of moment technique. It was one of the basic techniques of the knights. Speed is always the key. Enkrid blocked the thrust with the flat of his gladius. He had used will of moment in the same way.
Even this.
In their previous sparring matches, even when he used will, he had done so in a segmented manner. The breaks between each use of will were clear. When he used will of moment, there was a clear setup beforehand. It was obvious, but now it wasn't.
You blocked that? If you think it was just luck, try again.
Both of them were smiling now. As Enkrid spoke, he swung his sword downward, and Asia pretended to block horizontally, only to dodge it at the last moment. As his sword lost its way and slashed down, she launched another high-speed thrust. Enkrid twisted his body. The tip of the sword narrowly grazed his cheek. The surface of his skin split open, and a droplet of blood flew out. They clashed and swung their swords at each other, battling fiercely. Although Enkrid had overcome Asia's targeting the sword's tip technique, he had failed to completely overpower her. To be precise, it ended in a stalemate. If either of them had truly intended to kill the other, one of them might have died, but neither had that intention. So it ended with both of them tired and wounded. Enkrid's left upper arm had been stabbed, rendering it unable to move, and Asia had a deep slash on her calf, limiting her mobility. After they stepped back a few paces and paused their swords for a moment, Asia asked,
What are you really?
She asked again, unable to hide her bewilderment.
No, seriously, why are you smiling?
From her perspective, she could see Enkrid with a broad grin on his face. It was utterly baffling to her. There are limits to enjoying a fight. Being able to smile even in a situation like this meant something was seriously wrong with his head. By now, the sun was setting. The sunlight streaming through the window was fading, and twilight was beginning to fall. Asia frowned. Even then, Enkrid was still smiling.
Has he gone mad from fighting?
It seemed entirely possible. Looking at her, Enkrid finally spoke.
I'm so excited I could die.
What?
What was he talking about? Enkrid's eyes gleamed with the light of the disappearing sun. There was a glow in his eyes made of pure passion and fervor. Then he finished speaking.
I'm so thrilled to know there's still a path to climb that I feel like I'm going crazy.
He meant it. It was pure, untainted joy. Enkrid had honed his sense of evasion, his sense of attack, and now added precision to his senses. Even though the techniques he had learned so far had each advanced a step, he still couldn't fully defeat Asia. And that was why. Because there was still room to grow, still more to train, still a higher path to climb, and now he could see it and almost touch it. That's what made him so happy.
You crazy bastard.
Asia sincerely acknowledged his nature. It was something he'd heard often.
That is not a wall.
The ferryman appeared in his dreams. Lately, he seemed even more relaxed than before. Enkrid couldn't respond. It was a dream, after all. A fleeting fragment, almost like an echo, but it was a vivid fragment that stayed in his memory. He felt as though, no matter what, he had to follow the ferryman's words.
Kill her.
Someone commanded him, and it seemed like he had to obey. Enkrid casually ignored everything.
What a damn fine morning.
Before the sun had even risen, Enkrid muttered to himself and stepped outside. Rem, half asleep, blinked groggily and glanced at his retreating figure, tilting his head in confusion.
Why are you acting crazy this early in the morning?
The air had been tense with unease since last night, so what could possibly be so good? That's what Rem meant by his words, but Enkrid didn't care. He continued training his body with the isolation technique. His thoughts naturally organized themselves and came to a conclusion. Thoughts about the wall. The wall is a condition, if the condition is to kill the twitted stabber. Sometimes, simply surviving was the condition. There were times when just blocking a knight's sword once was the condition. Was there only ever one path through all of these days? No, there wasn't, and this time would be no different. No matter what the ferryman said, Enkrid did things his way, which meant doing whatever he wanted. A little later, when Esther transformed back into her human form and said she was heading out, Enkrid saw her and said,
Bring back a melon.
Melon was a rare fruit from the southern lands, difficult to find on this continent.
Your condition's getting worse by the day.
Esther replied indifferently and went on her way, concluding it was impossible to understand this man.
Why are you so excited? Do you feel like you're about to fly or something?
Rem had known him long enough. He could tell that his commander was in an unusually good mood. Jackson noticed it too and gave him a curious look. Dunbachel seemed to be lost in thought, her eyes losing focus repeatedly, and Ragna had never really cared about such matters. It made sense for him to be excited. Naturally, he had been carrying a heavy weight in his heart, but now it was gone. It's like taking off a sandbag you've been carrying. Suddenly, your body feels lighter. On top of that, he could see a path forward, and walking down that path brought him great joy.
Oh, just thinking about knocking someone out makes my heart race.
Enkrid said. Rem, of course, didn't understand him, but he didn't question it either. Soon after, when the sheriff appeared and Enkrid knocked him out cold, Rem couldn't help but ask,
Was this the guy you were planning to knock out?
did he know the sheriff was coming? That was the meaning behind Rem's question. Enkrid laughed.
No.
The one he intended to knock out was the female knight with the orange hair. A goal had been set, so the only thing left was to strive and keep striving until the end. Enkrid did just that. He already saw the path. His hand could almost reach it. He just needed to elevate everything he had to the next level. Walking according to the milestones was something he was naturally skilled at. What he needed was precision, detail, and delicacy.
I've already learned it.
Then it was just a matter of repeating it until it became second nature. For Enkrid, nothing was easier. What he needed was time. The repetition of today, he did that too. Enkrid diligently spent his days, one after another.
Do you think you can manage that?
The ferryman asks. He urges Enkrid to learn despair, to embrace frustration. He says that trembling in agony is natural. He plants doubts in Enkrid's mind.
What if I'm wrong?
What if this is the wrong path? It doesn't matter. Even if, after surpassing this, there's another wall, he'll just surpass that too. So for now he walks the path forged by his will. The wall is a condition, but it's one he set for himself. He chose not to kill, but to knock them down instead. If something blocks him there, he'll overcome that too. It's a resolution, but at the same time a calm mindset. Sensing this within the realm of his mind, the ferryman, if he had a tongue, would have clicked it. But since he physically had no tongue to click, he only muttered.
That crazy bastard again.
The ferryman realized that the condition of the wall had changed. It was the will of the cursed one that had altered it. It was absurd, but not entirely impossible or unheard of. He had experienced it himself. Usually when people realize the condition of a wall, they take an easier path, so it's rare to see something like this. But what about Enkrid?
The hard way.
He chose a path even harsher. Holding out and overpowering the female knight with the orange hair was already a difficult task. But Enkrid aimed to do that in a short time. He instinctively realized that just holding out wouldn't be enough to get through today.
He's insanely mad.
The ferryman muttered to himself once again. There was no reply. As always, he wandered alone over the river. Enkrid didn't think it was impossible to overcome the wall he faced. After countless sparring sessions, he had grown accustomed to Asia's habits. Sure, if it were a fight to the death, it would be easier. But this was the path he chose because he didn't want that. They say if you chase 2 rabbits, you'll lose both. But wouldn't it be better if he could catch both?
Why only catch one?
He had the repetition of today, so he decided to make the condition to catch both rabbits.
I'll surpass this wall without killing Asia.
He would overpower her in a short time and move forward. He would find his place. That place would be in front of Krang. Enkrid set that as his standard. What about what happens afterward? He didn't care about that. If the one cutting the thread blocked his way again, he'd overcome that as well. It wasn't the first time he'd faced a series of walls. But he had a strange feeling. That man appeared under certain conditions. Just that didn't make him seem like a wall blocking his way. The fact that Asia faced him first only strengthened that feeling. If it were his wall, it would have stood before him.
Rem.
It was a new day, one he met with that mindset. Today he decided to move forward. As soon as he woke up, Enkrid called for Rem.
The sun hasn't even risen yet.
Rem replied, his eyes still closed.
Get up, you barbarian bastard. I'll knock the filth out of that head of yours.
His tone was too calm to be considered a provocation, but Rem responded to the words. The barbarian opened his eyes. His gray pupils pierced through the pre-dawn blue light, locking onto Enkrid.
Fine, let's set up a tombstone today.
It was a kind of signal, a sign from Enkrid that he was ready for a fight that would put half his life on the line. Rem accepted that challenge.
What should the epitaph say?
As Rem got up and grabbed his axe, he spoke.
A pioneer who split open the barbarian's skull to explore. Are you really asking to die today?
Rem was half serious.
If you underestimate me, you're the one who will die.
Enkrid warned. Rem didn't know the accumulation of today's results. He would be careless because of that. The same went for Asia, which meant,
if you can't stop me, then neither can Asia.
Just as Enkrid stepped outside, gauging the distance and assuming his stance, Andrew came out rubbing his eyes and was startled. The sound echoed, as if clearing away the morning mist. Enkrid had leaped forward in an instant, swinging his long sword with the speed of a striking willow, and Rem met it with his axe. The two stood frozen in place, weapons locked against each other, their breaths rising into the air. Mixed with the cool dawn, their exhalations appeared like blue smoke. Both of them exuded an aura twice as menacing as usual.
Damn, did you have a nice dream?
Rem asked, still with his weapon locked against Enkrid's.
I have those every day.
Dreaming of death wasn't exactly a good thing, but none of his days were spent in vain, so every day was worth something. Sensing an unusual level of intensity in Enkrid, Rem responded.
Good, let's see who dies.
Enkrid had been through this already, half dying as he learned. He had fought Asia repeatedly. Enkrid had been walking forward, always advancing. After dozens of more days stacked on top of each other, he was further ahead. The sparring match with Rem ended at an appropriate point. Enkrid had used everything he needed to.
Sometimes it's really strange, almost bizarre when I look at you.
Rem finally said, not with shock but with some degree of amazement in his eyes. It was a calm look, but the emotion beneath it was unmistakable. Ragna and Jackson were no different. Even Dunbachel opened her eyes that way. Esther, just before leaving, had the same expression. Enkrid brushed the sweat off his hair with his hand. The preparations were complete. Repeating the same day and making it to Asia was something he could now do with his eyes closed. In fact, he fought with his eyes closed, knocking down the advance instructor who faced him once again.
Damn it. What's the deal? Why are you fighting with your eyes closed?
Ignoring the shoots of the man on the brink of death, Enkrid slit his throat, helped a maid hide in a corner, and continued on. Half running, he charged toward Asia.
What's behind you?
He asked when they finally faced each other.
What?
I'm asking what's behind you.
Asia frowned at Enkrid's question.
What are you talking about?
I'm asking because I don't know.
Then why are you so confident?
It's a habit.
Crazy bastard.
I hear that often enough.
Either way, I can't let you go. It's a death trap.
I doubt it. Prove it.
It was a similar conversation. Asia raised her sword and aimed, and Enkrid, with his eyes closed, deflected it.
What is this?
You don't need to try again, but you must be doubtful, right? Go ahead. Try again.
Asia frowned but did as he said. She aimed her sword. Once again, Enkrid deflected it. Even with his eyes closed, he swung his sword as if he could see. Then, he disregarded her precise targeting and ignored the tip of her sword.
What did you do?
Asia asked, astonished.
Just attack.
There was no need for words, so she did. What were Asia's strengths? What made her unique? At a glance, it wasn't immediately apparent. That's how well she concealed herself. It made sense for someone whose specialty was illusionary sword techniques. Her key skills were her precise targeting with a sword tip, her feints, and her speed. Her footwork was incredibly quick, and she often used subtle intimidation to disrupt her opponent's movements.
So, what's her weakness?
She lacked strength. Therefore, the strategy to face her was simple. Press with correct sword techniques and pin her down with heavier strikes. Instead of his silver sword, Enkrid wielded a gladius in one hand, delivering short, sharp blows. Asia blocked them repeatedly. Enkrid calmly pressured her. Through the repetition of today's battle, he had pinpointed and exploited her weaknesses.
You.
Mid-fight, Asia let out a shout, whether it was a battle cry or something else, and shifted her footwork. Switching the position of her feet, she leaped to the side in an instant. With a push from the ground, she kicked off the wall and swung her sword as she flew. Her speed and light body made this possible. It was a result of Enkrid repeatedly driving her into a corner. She kicked off the wall, moving horizontally as she lunged at him. As always, she was exceptionally skilled at responding to unexpected situations. Handling illusionary sword techniques had given her a wealth of experience, which had a side benefit. She was able to react to almost any unforeseen event. In simple terms, her ability to predict her opponent's movements during a fight was extremely broad. Even now, while being blocked by precise strikes and pinned by heavier ones, this was still within her expected range. By kicking off the wall, she ran along it, parallel to the ground. She turned the battlefield into a three-dimensional space. She escaped the domain of precise swordsmanship and occupied a space that was momentarily free from the pressure of heavier strikes. With her nimble body and incredible sense of balance, she ran along the wall.
But what if it's beyond her expected range?
Through their many battles, Enkrid had learned the limits of Asia's predictive range. It was something he could understand by repeating today's events. Therefore,
I'll surpass it.
what she was showing was impressive, but it was within his expectations. Enkrid brought his gladius into the path of her sword, then let it go. The gladius dropped to the ground, and in that moment, as Asia's body tilted while running along the wall, Enkrid dashed forward underneath her. He pushed off the ground quickly and low. The carpet beneath his feet tore as if it had exploded. Asia, unable to retrieve her sword in time, pulled out the hidden dagger she had in her chest. With her left hand, she drew a short dagger and stabbed. It was as fast as his instant strikes, but it was something he was already familiar with. Enkrid bet everything on this moment. If he succeeded, he would subdue her in an instant. If he failed, he'd repeat this again. It was the 7th time he had attempted this move. His focus was so intense that the trajectory of Asia's dagger appeared to slow down. Enkrid, feeling as though he was wading through thick mud, crossed his arms and reached out. This was the Valaf-style martial arts technique, weapon disarm. He clamped down on Asia's wrist with his crossed arms. The trajectory of the dagger was naturally diverted. Enkrid deliberately guided the blade towards his own stomach. The outer leather armor was pierced with a soft thud, but it was stopped by the bandage armor underneath. In that moment, he twisted both wrists that were holding her arm. A groan escaped from Asia's mouth as her wrist twisted. With his left hand gripping her wrist and his right hand spread wide between his thumb and index finger, Enkrid thrust forward and struck her throat. Just as Asia's dagger was piercing into his abdomen, Enkrid's right hand was already in motion. The sound of the impact echoed.
Gah.
Asia let out a second groan. While the first groan was from surprise, the second one was from the shock. Enkrid stepped forward, hooked her heel with his foot, grabbed her hair, and slammed her head into the shield decoration. Blood sprayed from her nose and face. It was brutal and bold, but it didn't end there. He threw her body to the ground as if discarding it, and with all his weight behind him, slammed his elbow into her torso. Several of her ribs broke. Her internal organs were likely damaged as well.
Ha.
Only then did Enkrid exhale and roll to his side, rising to his feet. Asia had already passed out, her eyes rolled back, her face a mess. Still, with divine power, she would fully recover. There was no time to waste. Enkrid took a brief moment to catch his breath. If he had let his guard down even for a second, she would have escaped his grasp immediately. It wasn't overkill. It was just enough. After leaving Asia shattered like a broken vase, Enkrid stood. It was still before sunset. He picked up his fallen sword and moved forward, heading inside. Soon he found the source of the commotion and ran toward it. As he sprinted, his heart pounded alongside him. Though the heart of the beast gave him both boldness and calmness, his heart still raced, likely from the anticipation of whatever would come next. He ran toward the noise. At the half-shattered doorway, a few figures were trying to break in. One of them turned around and faced Enkrid.
Do you know where you are?
A man with sharp eyes blocked his path, his skill level uncertain. But the emblem on his armor was familiar. It was the symbol of the kingdom, the sword and the sun god. In other words, it was the symbol of the Red Cape Knights. That didn't stop Enkrid from charging. Instead, he tightened his grip on his sword.
Madman.
The opponent thrust his sword forward. Enkrid swung his own sword straight toward the blade, flying toward him. Enkrid didn't know it, but the emblems of the Red Cape Knights varied according to rank. For instance, a knight would have 3 swords crossed like the royal emblem, and the mythical sun god, with a round head and flaming mane engraved on their emblem. Junior knights would remove 1 sword from the design. Squires would only have 1 sword engraved, and based on the tests and tasks they completed, the emblem's shape would change. The opponent standing before Enkrid bore an emblem of a single sword with the sun god engraved on it. This was the emblem of squires who had proven their skills. Just a few more tests, and they would become junior knights. Their sword was fast and precise, like an eagle snatching its prey. In response, Enkrid thrust his sword forward without considering the opponent's habits or special techniques. Instead, he twisted the sword the moment their blades met. Clink! The squire's expression shifted rapidly. The force he felt from Enkrid's sword was like that of a giant. It was natural, as Enkrid wielded the sword enveloped in the heart of great strength. As their blades clashed, the squire's sword was flung upwards, while Enkrid's sword traced the path he desired. It thrust forward in a straight line. At the end of its trajectory was the armor covering the squire's chest. Thunk, rip, squish. 3 distinct sounds melded into one. The tip of the sword pierced through the armor and into the heart. Enkrid withdrew his sword as quickly as he had thrust it and stepped back. Exactly 1 step. Even as blood gushed from the squire's chest, they swung their sword horizontally. The blade sliced through the air where Enkrid had just stood. Bloodshot eyes stared at him. Ugh. The squire coughed up blood while still gripping his sword, collapsing to the side. He blinked a few times. The moment of death was near.
Why?
To the squire, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, a phenomenon that occurs when thoughts accelerate just before death. He refused to accept reality. Why had he lost? Who was this opponent? He had sparred with many junior knights. Being defeated like this didn't make sense. They had only exchanged a single blow. Then came the regret.
Was it the wrong choice?
He regretted his involvement in this, but would anything have changed if he had stayed uninvolved? The promise he had been given after completing this task was an emblem with an additional sword engraved. Regardless of his current abilities, he was meant to rise above the rank of junior knight. He had thought of it like an already tipped water bottle. Wasn't it natural to side with those who had a chance of winning?
I was wrong.
As death approached, regret was joined by realization.
It was my fault.
Was this the same mindset he had when he first dreamed of becoming a knight and was recognized for his talent? Did he wield his sword to align himself with the winning side and claim a reward? No, it wasn't.
I wish to uphold chivalry.
His past mentors, seniors, and comrades had responded to his naive words.
How romantic of you. Yes, well, when you become a knight, let's call you the Knight of Romance. What kind of title is that? It's ridiculous. Haha, well, good luck anyway.
The squire had also dreamed of the ideals of chivalry learned from poetry and song, but somewhere along the way he had forgotten that dream and pursued something new: power, wealth, honor. From the moment he thought honor came from admiration, he had started to stray. He dreamed of altering his emblem. He wanted an additional sword to be engraved. What had he hoped to become through that? Like a wilting flower, like a breaking sword, one squire lay on the ground. In front of him stood a man, not even out of breath, holding a sword as he looked ahead. Blood dripped from the sword onto the floor. The hallway was already a mess. Broken furniture, the remains of a half-shattered door, bloodstains, corpses, broken blades. Among the debris, the man stood tall, black hair and blue eyes. Recently, he had been escorting a party, so a few in the room recognized who he was.
They said he's a half-wit from the border guard.
One of them muttered. He opened his mouth but quickly shut it. Enkrid's gaze had turned to him. Did he hear that? He had muttered quietly, so there was no way he could have heard it. The man's thoughts and his muttering were of no concern to Enkrid.
Who's inside?
Enkrid asked. It was an ordinary question, but to those remaining, it sounded different. After all, he had just killed a squire in one strike. The atmosphere naturally flowed into pressure. It wasn't exactly intimidation, but it wasn't much different either. If the people on the receiving end felt it as such, how was it any different from intimidation? There were 8 standing in front of the door. The commander swallowed hard. Could they take him down if all 8 attacked at once?
Not a chance.
His face paled with complex thoughts, and cold sweat trickled down as he considered breaking down the door. At that moment, Enkrid took a step forward. With a firm thud, his foot kicked aside a half-broken wooden shield fragment lying beneath him. As he walked, one of the soldiers blocking the path moved aside. A few others gritted their teeth and tried to stand their ground at the door. Enkrid approached, raising his sword. If they blocked, he would cut them down. Once his will was set, true intimidation naturally followed. It was real pressure. One of the soldiers in front of him broke out into a cold sweat. Before long, he too moved aside as if fleeing. That was the end of it. No one else was left to block the way.
Are you staying because you want to fight?
Enkrid asked.
No.
The commander replied. Then why are you still here? Enkrid's eyes asked the question.
We will retreat.
The commander spat the words out as if chewing them. Standing their ground would be a foolish death. They were just fortunate he hadn't decided to cut them all down. Silently, they all followed suit. Among them were mercenaries under Viscount Murnus, and soldiers as well. They knew full well they weren't supposed to leave this place. They could be held accountable and executed later. Viscount Murnus was strict when it came to rewards and punishments, especially toward those who made mistakes. He never let them go. Yet, they withdrew without a word. The sheer force of Enkrid's presence was different. If they fought, they would die. That was certain. His presence was overwhelming. Fear welled up from within. Courage was nowhere to be found. Their will was soon broken. Thus they couldn't block him, and thus they couldn't stand their ground. Without even glancing back, Enkrid examined the area behind the broken door.
Who's inside?
He asked, tapping the half-shattered door lightly with the tip of his sword. From inside there was a crack sound, something sharply striking the ground.
You?
A voice from within reached his ears. He recognized it. It was the whip-wielding bodyguard.
What was his name again?
His memory was hazy, the side effect of repeating countless days. No matter how good his memory was, it couldn't be helped.
Rhett?
Enkrid asked.
Who is that?
It sounded close, but not quite right.
Melon, are you doing this on purpose?
Why was he acting like this in such a serious situation? Matthew thought to himself. Why did his lord trust a man like this? He couldn't understand it at all.
It's Matthew. Ah, right, Matthew. What about the ones outside? They're gone. Where? They probably went wherever they were headed.
Enkrid had no obligation to protect other nobles or anyone else, nor did he have any desire to. He didn't feel like he had to kill those men either. He understood that Marcus had asked for help, and that he had asked him to protect Krang. So that's exactly what he did.
He's inside, right?
Enkrid asked.
Come in.
Came the reply. Finally, the dresser blocking the door was pushed aside with a scraping sound. Upon entering, the inside was just as much of a mess. There were 7 bodies. Matthew, with half of his face bandaged, stood next to another female warrior. The female warrior was holding a long trident and had a wary look in her eyes. She wore chainmail that only covered her upper body, and her left shoulder armor was visibly cracked and cut. She showed signs of having narrowly survived a significant threat. Watching her try to move her left shoulder, she seemed uncomfortable.
Where?
Here.
Turning to look, Enkrid spotted Krang's face peeking out from a hole in the ground.
I told you, even if we die, you must go.
Matthew said angrily, clearly displeased.
Where would I go, leaving you behind? If this is where it ends for me, then so be it.
Krang replied calmly. Even in moments like this, he showed his difference in character. Waving at Enkrid, Krang said,
You're late.
I tripped over a rock on the way.
Enkrid shrugged in response, leaving out the part where the rock had been an orange-clad female knight from the Red Cape Knights. Krang pulled his hand out of the hole and started climbing up. It looked like some kind of emergency escape tunnel, but Enkrid wondered why it was just a hole and not a proper staircase. There was a ladder inside, and the sound of Krang climbing up could be heard. The tunnel seemed to be slanted.
You shouldn't.
Matthew tried to stop him. Just because Enkrid had cleared the way didn't mean it was safe now. Yet Krang ignored him and continued climbing up. The woman with the trident was keeping watch outside. Enkrid briefly wondered who she was, but of course, Matthew wasn't the only one assigned to guard Krang.
Krang wasn't the type to go down easily.
Krang had undoubtedly prepared for situations like this, so Enkrid never thought for a moment that Krang would be dead. But the fact that he had called for help meant it was dangerous. It was a sign that he needed someone like Enkrid.
I didn't expect you to ask for help.
We're friends, aren't we? Let's just call it a debt repaid.
Krang said after pulling himself out of the hole. In reality, Krang had plans in place, but the situation had gotten so dire and time so tight that everything was falling apart. If Enkrid hadn't shown up, Krang was ready to die holding his ground. Even so, despite having come so close to death, Krang laughed. His hand didn't even tremble.
You wish to become king, yet why?
Matthew spoke, his words heavy with frustration. To him, it must have seemed incomprehensible. But this was the relationship they had. Krang was the kind of master who listened to what Matthew had to say.
Because I wish to become king.
Krang's reply carried weight, even more so than before. The surrounding noise seemed to vanish. As the atmosphere shifted, Krang spoke again.
If I wish to become king, but all I do is run around trying to save my own life, what kind of king could I be? If I can't even protect the people I care about, what good would I be sitting on a throne? Should I just sit there and eat grapes served by handmaidens? Shut up, Matthew. If I die here, then that's simply where my fate ends. I've done my best, prepared for much, and here I stand. I will not leave, losing more than I've already lost.
Enkrid felt chills. These were just words, but how does one give words true power? By not letting them end as just words. Krang had shown that through his actions, risking his life was the right thing to do.
I also need to do this to keep the promise I made to the queen.
Krang said this with a smile toward Matthew.
So stop nagging already.
His last words were light, like a friend's casual remark. Only now did Enkrid truly understand why Krang had called him. Was it because of the danger? Because it was a crisis? No.
It's because he refuses to run away.
It was Krang's way of refusing to turn his back on the dream he held. Enkrid, strangely enough, saw himself in Krang at that moment. Despite knowing they didn't belong together, despite being so different, he saw himself, trapped in the present, desperately struggling. That struggle was a way to take even a single step forward. That was how Krang lived. Enkrid's heart stirred. He wanted to help. This was Krang's talent, the ability to inspire such feelings in others.
Someone's coming.
The female bodyguard holding the trident said. She spoke as she moved to bring furniture back in front of the door.
How many?
Matthew asked.
1 person?
Yes, one.
The woman answered. The sound of Matthew grinding his teeth could be heard.
This is the worst-case scenario, isn't it?
Krang asked from behind, his voice still light and cheerful. It was something Matthew had mentioned before. They could hold off a large group, but a single skilled opponent might be impossible to stop.
Now it's time to test our luck.
He added. Enkrid responded with words that came from deep within.
Then I'll be your luck.
Krang turned to look at him, but Enkrid, instead of waiting for a response, spoke ahead.
Don't block the way, Matthew.
He was speaking to Matthew, who was trying to block the entrance with furniture. Barricading themselves inside might work against a large number of soldiers, but it would be pointless against an elite few. In other words, someone with Enkrid's level of strength wouldn't be hindered by such makeshift obstacles. Pushing the door open, Enkrid stepped outside and saw a man. To Enkrid, it was someone he had encountered before, though the man didn't know him. It was the same junior knight who had disrupted his day in the past. The man's left eyebrow twitched as he looked at Enkrid.
Did you kill Isia?
He asked.
I put her to sleep.
Enkrid replied. His lullaby had been a combination of fists and kicks. The man looked like he was about to say something else, but instead he lunged forward, drawing his sword and swinging it. The sound of the sword being drawn was followed by a flash of light descending from above. It was a perfect timing move designed to break Enkrid's flow. Having faced this man once before, Enkrid was able to react. He drew his gladius with his right hand, intending to deflect the blade. But Enkrid's attempt failed. With a loud crash, his right wrist nearly snapped. Not only was the timing perfect, but the sword swings were also deceptive. From the question to the footwork, everything was designed to disrupt Enkrid's rhythm, mixing feints with real strikes. As he endured and blocked the attack, Enkrid realized something.
Stronger than Asia.
Perhaps on par with Rem. In an instant, in the narrow space between openings, the opponent drew another sword and thrust forward. At that moment, a whip made from twisted beast leather snapped into the space between Enkrid and his opponent. It was Matthew's skillful intervention.
Half a day. My plan from the start was to only hold out for half a day.
Krang spoke just before the fight. It was the first time Matthew had heard it. As soon as Matthew heard those words, he glanced outside. The sun hadn't set yet. It wasn't even close to dusk.
Do we have to hold out until evening?
He predicted it wouldn't be easy, but... Whip. With a slight twist of his wrist, the tip of the whip danced forward as if it were alive. The opponent didn't even look at it, striking near the handle of the whip with his elbow, not the tip. With just a tap, the force carried through the whip dissipated, and it slackened. The opponent had precisely cut off the point where the energy transferred. Matthew felt as if his momentum had been abruptly severed, but he clenched his teeth and gathered his strength. He swung his arm wide, launching the weight at the end of the whip forward as if shooting it. Whip. The whip sliced through the air. In the meantime, Enkrid swung his sword. From above, it came down in a vertical slash like a bolt of lightning. The force contained within it could be felt by Matthew.
If he blocks it, there'll be an opening.
Even for a junior knight, it was unavoidable. The opponent struck just above the ricasso of Enkrid's sword, pushing it aside. Rather than fighting force with force, he deflected Enkrid's power to the side with skillful precision. Enkrid's body was momentarily thrown off balance to one side. Having exerted all his strength, his posture faltered for an instant, but even while off balance, he spun on the spot, thrusting forward with an unpredictable stab, a technique honed after toppling Asia. It was a thrust known as the moment, whip. The opponent dodged it as casually as a child might avoid a thrown stone, twisting his waist to evade. His evasion was so natural, it seemed effortless. Enkrid sheathed his first sword, Ember, and gripped Silver with both hands, swinging, thrusting, slashing, and changing his position multiple times. Matthew, too, swung his whip several times, even as his momentum kept faltering. Their companion, wielding a trident, also lunged whenever there was an opening. Even though she was injured, she was certainly skilled. Yet the opponent didn't even bother to properly avoid the trident. He dodged it just like he swatted away an annoying fly, either turning his body to avoid it when it was about to hit, or striking it away with his sword to divert its path. Matthew's whip was no more of a threat. Only Enkrid was holding the line. That's why Matthew despaired.
Hold out against an opponent like this until evening.
Impossible. It wouldn't be surprising if Enkrid collapsed any moment. A blade grazed Enkrid's cheek. Blood trickled from the slight wound, scattering into the air. Without concern for the cut, Enkrid threw himself sideways, slashing horizontally. Whip. Though the strike seemed as if it could tear the very air apart, the opponent simply stepped back lightly. Enkrid's blade passed through the space where he had just stood. The opponent moved without a sound, not even a footstep, as he evaded. Watching it filled Matthew with a sense of futility. It was a wall, a different existence, a different level of talent. Even their very origins were different. To hold out against someone like this?
Impossible.
Despair and anguish filled his heart. The strength drained from his hand, the hand holding the whip. He couldn't stop his spirit from collapsing. Swinging his whip felt like hitting a cliff over and over. No matter how long he struck it, he knew it wouldn't crumble. It was the most obvious thing. How could a whip ever hope to bring down the cliff that stood before him? In the midst of it all, their companion, wielding the trident, was fatally wounded. Despite Enkrid fighting ferociously, slashing and charging forward, their companion was still struck. The opponent had thrown a single dagger backward and it found the gap in her defense, slicing through her neck. The precision of that throw was terrifying, enough to raise goosebumps. Blood gushed, flowing freely. Their companion clutched her neck, and Krang, who had been watching, came over to tightly bind it with cloth. Matthew vaguely heard him say,
Hold on.
"There's no time to look back. It's just a thought that's been gnawing at his mind for a while now.
Does this even have any meaning?
If saving Krang gives it meaning, then that's enough. If holding out for that is what it takes, he would do it. But even that's not possible. He can't hold them off any longer, and Krang will die. Should he have just let him run away till the end? No, Krang, his lord, had said that would only kill the person inside first. It was at that moment, as the dark paint spread across his heart.
Ha!
A thunderous sound erupted with a yell. It was so loud that his ears rang. Both the battle cry and the explosion that followed were deafening enough to abuse his eardrums. A yell filled with such momentum, and a clash with such force. Matthew saw the one locked in battle, blood dripping from his side as their swords clashed. He caught sight of the back of a head with black hair. A broad back came into view. Unlike himself, this figure hadn't lost any momentum.
I've got you,
The man said.
You let yourself get caught.
His opponent responded. The words came from the man with curly brown hair, clumped together and falling over his forehead. It was only then that Matthew saw the enemy's face clearly.
Let's keep going.
Then Enkrid spoke, and something was in his voice. At some point their positions had changed. It was due to Enkrid's relentless attacks. Because of that, Matthew could now see Enkrid's face, and as soon as he did, a lump formed in his throat. From his toes up to his entire body, his hairs stood on end. Matthew knew. There was no way they could hold out until evening. It was impossible for Enkrid to defeat the newly arrived opponent. As proof, blood was pouring from Enkrid's side, his cheek was scratched, and the protective gear on his left forearm was tattered, cut at some point, and yet
He smiles.
Enkrid was smiling. Even as their swords clashed, even as his momentum was cut off over and over, he smiled like that. Seeing that, the black paint of despair that had covered Matthew's heart began to fade. Somewhere, sunlight broke through, and a white light crossed through the black paint. Strength returned to Matthew's arm. He lifted his whip and swung it again. Several more exchanges followed. During that time, Matthew dodged 3 thrown daggers. If luck hadn't been on his side, he wouldn't have avoided them. Matthew admitted this. Even those 3 daggers only had this much force because Enkrid had interfered. If he had been alone, there was no way he could have blocked them. The 4th dagger, which he couldn't avoid, lodged in his thigh.
I thought for sure he'd aim for my neck in one go.
He was already restricting Matthew's mobility, targeting that before anything else, knowing Matthew was a far inferior opponent.
No, that's also because of Enkrid.
Because of Enkrid, the dagger went into his leg and not his neck. Matthew retreated. At this point, he was only going to be a hindrance. Krang, who had been behind him, came up and supported him by slipping his arm under Matthew's armpit.
Don't get too close.
I know that much. He's going to lose, isn't he? He's holding on. I don't know.
Even Krang's eyes sparkled as he spoke. Matthew had barely managed to hold on because of something Enkrid had shown him. Yet it was still far too early for the sun to set.
When is the support coming?
Matthew asked. It was his duty to protect Krang, but before that, or perhaps even beyond that, a different desire naturally arose within him.
I can't let that man die here.
Enkrid must be saved. Matthew had steeled himself to throw his own body into harm's way if necessary. The reason? He didn't know. It was just that a surge of exhilaration filled his entire being. The only thought running through his mind was that Enkrid was not someone who should die here.
If that guy has any sense, he'll come a little sooner.
Krang said, pulling up a chair and seating Matthew on it. Then he examined the wound on Matthew's thigh. Krang wasn't an ordinary human either. Tending to injuries in a situation like this, Matthew's gaze naturally turned toward their companion, the one who had suffered a fatal wound to the neck.
She won't die,
Krang said. If they held out just a bit longer, that might be true. Both of them turned their attention to the fight unfolding before them. It was a battle too fierce for anyone to easily intervene in. On one side was someone who, like a puppet devoid of emotion, cut down the momentum with every swing of their sword. The other was like a wild stallion, charging with explosive energy, never holding back. The momentum kept breaking. No matter what he did, the flow didn't connect. This wasn't just a level above Asia, it was definitely on par with Rem, or perhaps not. He didn't know. This wasn't the time for such thoughts. He slashed vertically, then horizontally, stabbed, twisted, and mixed in the Valen mercenary sword technique. It was a feint. He pretended to be out of breath, drawing the opponent in, and they closed the distance without hesitation. That's when he thrust Ember forward. It was the will of the moment, a technique perfected through the battle with Asia, pushed to its limit. The thrust was like lightning. In an instant it reached its target. He combined the first lessons he had learned about thrusting from his days as a soldier with everything he had learned about speed up until now. Even so, it was blocked, and blocked in such a simple way that it was almost absurd. Ping, tiding. With a casual flick of the wrist, the opponent used a short sword to divert the tip of Ember, letting it glide harmlessly along the side of the blade. It was a display of precision, part of the opponent's fluid sword technique. Enkrid let go of Ember mid-air and dashed forward, gripping silver. He launched himself like an arrow. As fast as the opponent closed the distance, Enkrid charged forward just as quickly. The gap between them shrank. He had discarded his sword and entered close-quarters combat, but before he could reach, the opponent had already retreated, disappearing backward with a quick movement. The momentum was abruptly cut off. Enkrid ignored it. He kicked back with his foot, sending the falling blade of Ember into the air, where he caught it before it hit the ground. At the same time, he reached out and snatched silver from the air before it fell. The opponent, who had been watching, was suddenly right in front of him, thrusting a sword forward. This was an enemy specialized in exploiting openings, always disrupting the flow and only fighting on their own terms. Despite that, Enkrid held on. Normally, a person would be fed up with this kind of fight. They'd complain about the unfairness of it. They'd express their frustration. But Enkrid did none of that.
This is the first time.
It was new, different. All of it brought him joy and excitement.
I'll kill you, and then I'll kill Asia.
The man spoke as if he were discussing what to have for dinner, mashed potatoes and roasted duck. His tone was casual, just a statement of facts. If this man killed him, the same day would repeat. But if he killed Asia, would the day still repeat?
I'm not going to lose any more than I already have.
Enkrid responded. No, Krang's words carried determination. Would the worry of repeating this day be a reason to let the present slip away in vain?
I don't know.
He didn't want to know anything right now. All that mattered was swinging his sword. In this moment, that was enough.
Ha!
With a battle cry mixed with joy and exhilaration, he fought, reveling in the clash, with his sword and himself, his opponent and his sword, attack and defense, swordsmanship and martial arts filling his mind. In that moment, joy overflowed. Enkrid could feel the condensed experience from all the repeated days coming together as one. His body moved before he could think. It felt as though a god was guiding his limbs. On top of that, he could see his opponent's next move. The opponent was going to lift their sword to the upper right side and prepare for a thrust. He was already gripping his sword with both hands, lifting it. Seeing this, Enkrid's left foot stepped forward, pushing into the space to claim it. Enkrid twisted his body from the waist and swung his sword, not aiming for the head, but for the forearm. It didn't seem different from what he had done so far, but for the first time he had stolen the timing. It was a strike half a beat faster. Compared to a moment ago, it could be described as an ordinary speed and trajectory, yet the sword made contact. Pack! The sword cut through the opponent's forearm guard. Blood spurted. The opponent quickly extended their left arm to block and retreated. The opponent was surprised but didn't make a fuss. His reaction was simply, "My arm's been cut, I see." Then they continued the fight. Enkrid didn't even have time to relish the elation. His opponent was the epitome of emotionlessness, like unseasoned chicken breast. Dry and bland, he wielded emotionlessness as his weapon. No joy, no competitiveness, so what now? He just swung his sword, and so did Enkrid. If it worked once, it could work twice, but not immediately. The half-beat faster strike had only succeeded once. In battle, timing is always relative. The only reason Enkrid had been able to slip into his opponent's timing earlier was because his body had moved instinctively. Can't do it again? That's fine too. Enkrid pretended to charge forward, then stepped off the wall instead of the ground. He mimicked Asia's light-footed movements. The opponent swung his sword as if waiting for this moment. A diagonal slash that seemed to vanish into the air as it lunged. It was exactly half a beat faster than before. Though Enkrid expected it, the opening was difficult to block, and the blade pushed toward his head. Enkrid quickly pulled his sword back to block it. If he didn't, he'd be dead. He blocked it, but now his right wrist was completely twisted. He tried to deflect the force, but that failed too. The impact sent his body flying backward. With a thud, he hit the ground back first, rolling before getting back on his feet. And then he coughed up blood. His organs had been damaged from blocking the previous strike. It was a slash imbued with will. Enkrid hadn't realized it, but it was a technique designed to transmit shock directly to the opponent's body through their block. His legs trembled, and for a moment, his vision blurred. His body, pushed past its limits, refused to obey. Enkrid blinked a few times, and then someone stepped in front of him.
If you're going to kill someone, start with me. But in exchange, you let the others live. I think my life is worth at least that much.
It was Krang. Enkrid tried to stand, but he realized that his ribs were broken.
Lord,
Matthew shouted. Enkrid finally stood and spoke.
Who gave you permission?
Their opponent had come here to kill Krang.
you still have unfinished business with me, don't you?
Enkrid once again prepared himself for death. He also resigned himself to another repeat of this day. Was this another wall? If so, he would simply overcome it. But it wasn't a wall. At least something had twisted, something had changed. This was definitely not the same day as before. Their opponent raised his sword indifferently. Whether it was Krang, Enkrid, or Matthew standing between them, the enemy intended to keep slashing through again and again. At that moment, a chilling sixth sense kicked in. From behind, something came flying fast. A loud explosion rang out. A large object smashed through the broken window, crashing through the window frame itself as it barreled into the room. In an instant, it closed the distance, launching itself in front of Enkrid. It immediately swung something down toward the knight who had been disrupting his flow. Through his fading vision, Enkrid saw what the newcomer was holding, a blade, longer and thicker than a typical sword. The setting sun had begun to cast an orange glow through the window, illuminating the figure that had shattered it with their body. Enkrid recognized who had arrived and spoke.
I'm saved.
But I will keep moving forward. Stand down.
Esther stared at the figure in front of her, which appeared to be an illusion. She was on a path of curiosity, wondering what kind of trick this was. If they attacked, she was ready to show them that they were not on the same level, but the response was unexpected. They didn't engage in combat. Instead, they cast a spell on the magic circle they had drawn, and the result was an eye wizard of a distant figure, an illusion.
Quite the clever trick.
That thought crossed her mind. A spell that could summon an illusion like this must require considerable resources. It was a spell that bridged long distances. There was a difference between making an illusion appear and showing someone as they really were. People said there were wizards who could do that with something like a water mirror, but it wasn't common. It wasn't Esther's area of expertise, nor had she ever seen it done. Despite her inner thoughts, Esther stood calmly without blinking. A breeze blew by. She had left the capital and come to a nearby forest. Two wizards who had created the illusion's spell circle stood respectfully with their hands clasped beside her, and now the figure emerged through the illusion. Count Molson, someone she had seen alongside Enkrid.
But I will keep moving forward. For a wizard, the most important thing is world that aligns with their will. What I offer is clear. What do you say?
The figure radiated confidence. They clearly believed there was no reason for her to refuse. He wasn't asking her to help him, nor to betray anyone, and he certainly wasn't asking her to scheme against Enkrid. He only wanted one thing, for her to step back and watch. There was no need to weigh both sides. The person before her wielded advanced magic. The artifacts and research materials he was offering were valuable, highly valuable. In contrast, what he was asking wasn't particularly significant. This man understood what was important to a wizard. The two wizards standing beside her assumed Esther would nod in agreement. Count Molson had likely calculated this too. Esther had stayed by Enkrid's side to remove the curse, but now Enkrid's presence wasn't necessarily required. She had already opened a new path using part of the curse. Things had changed now. So the offer was indeed tempting. It would provide her with resources to expand her world. There was no reason not to accept. It was annoying how Count Molson seemed to understand that, but it didn't really matter. Even if he was playing games, she had the power to ignore it. The experiences she had endured with the curse remained fully within her world. Esther quietly stared into the eyes that gazed at her without speaking. Being an illusion, they were colorless. She locked eyes with the colorless illusion. The sight of it made her chuckle. As she smiled and burst into laughter, the two wizards beside her turned their gaze toward her. She sensed them flinch. They were ready to act if things went south. When Esther raised her arm, her coat parted, revealing the form-fitting outfit underneath. There was a flicker of lust in the eyes of the two wizards. As she looked at the illusion and the two wizards who followed others' words like puppets, Esther reminded herself of who she was. She was a witch who wielded the fire of the dark world. A witch who fought, struggled, and carved out a path through the world. A witch born to seek truth through fire. Therefore she would not be swayed by the will of others. This wasn't for Enkrid's sake at all.
Well.
The Count spoke first. There was something like fire in Esther's eyes.
I will burn it all the same.
Esther spoke, and for the first time since being cursed she drew fire from within her world. She had traveled far, and the sun was nearly set.
A pity.
The Count spoke just before the illusion disappeared, his tone so calm it was hard to tell if he truly felt regret.
Do you think he's still alive?
He asked. Who else could he be referring to? Esther sneered at him.
If he were the kind to die from something like this, he would have been dead long ago.
As if he would die just because one wizard was gone.
As if, step aside, if you do, I will give you everything.
Esther paused for a moment, wondering if referring to them as only that was appropriate. She thought for a brief moment, but her body moved on its own. The flames flared up. The two wizards began casting spells to resist. It was useless. Their resistance was meaningless. They and she were on different levels, possessed different things, and had walked different paths. Rem was running, thinking to himself, they're hiding something. Should he just face it head on? That would be fun, but flipping the situation on them would probably be even more entertaining. He decided to do both. As he ran, he pulled out a sling. He placed a round stone into the leather launcher and spun the attached strings above his head. Whir, whir, whir. What started as a gentle rotation quickly escalated into a sharp, piercing sound. It was like running with a disc above his head. The madman of immortality didn't even look back and dashed into the alleyway. Rem didn't chase after him. Instead, he stepped onto the protruding eave of a nearby shop and leaped upward. His body soared into the air. He climbed onto the roof and ran. The disc above his head followed him like a spear. The moment Rem had a clear view from the rooftop, he shot the stone. Hitting a target while standing still was difficult enough, but doing so while running, well, that was Rem for you. The stone flew so fast that its trajectory was barely visible and struck the back of his opponent's thigh. However, it wasn't the sound Rem had expected. Why did it sound like a drum bursting? Behind the man, a spear shaft had snapped.
Sorcery.
And high-level sorcery at that. Where did he learn such things? It must have been from killing his own kind.
You're dead meat.
Rem muttered to himself, confirming his resolve. Even though the man couldn't hear him, Rem still spoke aloud. That was how determined he was. He shot a few more stones, and the 4 spears following behind the man shattered into pieces. Shards of wood scattered through the air. The madman of immortality didn't stop running, darting through the alleyways until he finally emerged into a wider space. It was a place that the back alley crowd referred to as the plaza. It wasn't very large, about 1/4 the size of the capital's central square. In the center of Nauril's capital, there was a plaza with a fountain, but this open area was the polar opposite of that in atmosphere. Still, it was large enough for 20 men to brawl in. This time the stone hit the ground. A cloud of dust rose as broken fragments scattered in all directions. The madman of immortality had rolled on the ground, and that's how he managed to avoid it. Even so, the next stone eventually struck the back of his thigh. If it weren't for the layered, specially made leather guards he wore, his leg would have been pierced or the flesh torn apart, but it didn't come to that. Instead, he grunted in pain, holding back a groan as he limped to his feet. Rem tossed aside the sling with its broken leather strings and looked down at the gathering crowd. From the roof, he naturally looked down while the others gazed up at him.
Wow, is this some kind of reunion?
Rem spoke with a hint of admiration. One by one, he observed them. They were all from the west. He didn't recognize any faces, but the atmosphere gave it away. They were all fugitives. The madman of immortality held his thigh for a while before standing up. It seemed to have hurt quite a bit.
You're not leaving here alive.
The madman of immortality saw Rem's very existence as a threat. If left alone, he knew Rem would keep coming after him, determined to kill him. That's why he got involved in this matter and interfered. His sole purpose was clear: to kill Rem. To achieve this, he gathered those who were once fugitives from the west. Among them were some he had taken as his disciples, and others were mercenaries who came purely for payment. The one thing they had in common was that all 20 of them were once candidates to become warriors of the West.
Was it him? Did he gather all of us just to take down one guy? I think I've seen him before. That's the one they call the Immortal Rem. He's famous around the border guard area. Famous? That's a joke. If he's just hiding out in the frontier, he's probably not much. Immortal? Sounds like something out of a Velopter scale shed.
Velopter referred to a type of reptilian mount in the West. Since its scales almost never shed, saying something like Velopter scale shed was akin to saying something was ridiculously improbable. Each of the gathered men made a remark. Their voices overlapped, but it wasn't hard to hear them. Among them, there were several who stayed silent, only their eyes gleaming. Those ones were clearly ready to fire the wind guns at their waists.
Disgraced fugitives always seem to be the loudest.
Rem muttered as he crouched down, bending his legs. He crouched on the rooftop, scanning the gathered group. Only a bunch of trash had come together. After watching for a moment, Rem pulled a sling from his chest, loaded a bullet neatly, then pulled out another sling and wedged it between his legs, using his thighs as an extra set of hands to load a second bullet. With his movements, the round bullets in the pouches tied to his waist clinked together as they slid into place. Holding 2 slings in his hands, he stood up and started spinning them simultaneously. Whirr! 2 circular discs formed in the sunlight behind Rem, spreading out diagonally like wings to either side. As Rem kicked off the roof and leaped upward, the 2 spinning discs gave the illusion that they were keeping him suspended in mid-air like wings. Of course, that wasn't really happening. It was just a trick of the eye. When Rem flicked his wrists, the bullets flew with a speed that was hard to follow, accompanied by a soft thwack as they did their work. Half of the Western fugitives raised shields. Some had thick, leather-reinforced shields, while others held small shields strapped to their wrists. Those holding small shields trusted in their skill. They were adept at spreading out the impact points, which is why they carried only shields large enough to cover their faces, but the heads of the 2 men carrying small shields burst open like smashed pumpkins. The sound was crisp. Blood and brains splattered into the air, Blood became paint on the canvas of the now darkened gray ground mixed with filth. The bullets were twice as fast as those that had hit the madman of immortality earlier, much faster than the group had anticipated, and consequently much deadlier. 2 Western fugitives died without even a chance to resist. The 2 fell backward, lifeless. As Rem landed back on the ground, he started spinning the slings again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
Block it!
The madman of immortality shouted.
Yeah, right.
Rem had already mapped out the fight from start to finish. It would start with the sling and end with the axe. In this place, the madman of immortality would die without question. It was a foregone conclusion. Time had passed since Rem first encountered the madman. In the meantime, Rem had been beaten by that madman, Ragna. How much that loss had affected him was something even Enkrid didn't know. The loss had pushed Rem to train relentlessly. He swung his axe and honed his skills, even secretly incorporating parts of Enkrid's isolation technique that he thought he could apply to himself during training. There was no time to be picky about whether it was a cold or hot stew. At that moment, it didn't matter if the food in his mouth was made by ghouls or by humans. What mattered was filling his belly.
Damn Ragna.
Even now, thinking of that bastard, Ragna, filled him with energy. Fueled by his rage, Rem unleashed his strength on the enemies before him. After hurling 2 more stone bullets at the advancing men, those with large shields began closing the distance. Thud! Thud! The multi-layered leather shields, reinforced with processed rubber wood, could withstand the impact of the bullets. The bullets embedded themselves into the shields without breaking through.
Crazy bastard.
One of the shield-bearers muttered, his face pale. The stones had turned out to be far more threatening than he had imagined, but was now the time to let their momentum falter? It was not. If their morale broke, neither sorcery nor martial arts would be of any use. Regardless of whether his opponents were stealing their resolve, Rem saw the advancing men release the slings that were still intact and reached for his waist. There, he gripped the handle of his axe. One of the enemies, seeing the long-handled axe, immediately leaped forward. It was a speed that was hard to ignore. In the blink of an eye, he was right in front of Rem. It was a spell-enhanced lightning step. As if he had anticipated this, Rem drew his axe and thrust it forward. It wasn't as fast as the lightning step, but it was perfectly timed. It was as if the man had run right into it on purpose. The charging man became the first victim of the axe blade. The axe blade, standing upright, split the man's head in 2. Naturally, someone with a head split in 2 can't survive. Yet, unaware that he was already dead, his body continued to lunge toward Rem. His hand gripped Rem's thigh. His specialty had always been grappling and breaking bones, and so gripping Rem's thigh, he died. Rem, with the man still hanging from him, began swinging his axe. Whoosh, crack, bang, thud. These men were nothing compared to Enkrid. The only real threat was the madman of immortality. He hurled his spear, mimicking a downstrike weapon, then rushed forward with another spear in hand. It was threatening, sure, but
Still far beneath that bastard Ragna.
after dancing around Ragna's blade, this was nothing. Rem's axe swiftly split the heads of 5 men, then severed the limbs of the 6th and 7th. The tide of battle had turned. These were men who hadn't even prepared themselves to risk their lives. That's why they had become fugitives in the first place.
He's a monster.
One of the men shouted. Even the madman of immortality had just realized it. The moment the thought of escape crossed his mind, he hurled all his remaining spears and grabbed the arm of one of his so-called disciples, throwing him with the strength of a bear, aided by a strength-enhancing spell.
Master.
The disciple's cry as he was thrown was pitiful. Rem swung his axe at the flying human projectile. Whoosh, thud! With the strength of a heart filled with raw power, Rem's arm held the force of a giant. Holding his breath, he swung the axe in a diagonal slash. The blade carved a perfect line toward the flying human projectile. Rem could feel the sensation of cutting through flesh, muscle, and bone as it passed through. The weight of the body pressed against him, but he endured it, and soon a sense of relief washed over him. The axe had fully cleaved through the man's body. With a thud, the split body fell in 2, brushing past Rem's shoulders as it dropped to the ground. Blood poured out, drenching Rem's entire body. Rem's gray eyes, now stained red, gleamed with light. He saw the back of the man fleeing. If anyone were to ask what Rem had trained the most after encountering the madman of immortality, he would confidently answer his leg strength. That's why he'd even stolen and trained in the isolation technique.
If I lose him again, my mother must be a ghoul.
Muttering a phrase he had picked up from Enkrid, Rem kicked off the ground. The madman of immortality sprinted away swiftly, and Rem pursued him without hesitation. It wasn't that no one else had survived the battle, but those who did were left standing, blinking in shock. They had only survived by sheer luck. Their gazes followed Rem and the madman of immortality as they ran. Earlier there had been a chase, but one side had set traps, and the other had knowingly fallen into them. This time was different. There were no traps, and the one chasing was fully determined. It would take no more than half a day before he was caught and killed. The survivors foresaw the madman of immortality's fate and began to move. Staying here would only mean a meaningless death.